Battery's gonna die. Gotta make this quick. Last month I made a Spotify playlist, which is not unusual for me. I've got playlists for Japanese city pop, each of the 4 seasons, my students' favorite songs, and like most of us, a massive 100-hour playlist with 1,200 of my favorite songs. The topic of this playlist, though, a particular mood I wanted to evoke, was new. It's not particularly long, nor is it well thought out or even good. It's just songs that put me in the mood to cry. Songs I have some past emotional connection to that made me feel something at some point in time and let me access those feelings again. I've been listening to my crying playlist too much. I haven't been crying as much as you might think. I just want to evoke old emotions, I guess. You may be worried about me, but I'm okay. I'm healthy, physically the best I've been since I was nearly manslaughtered last August. My family is great, my child's language skills are developing quickly, and it's a joy to be around them. Meanwhile, a new baby entered our lives, and they can't stop smiling, so neither can we. My work life isn't great because I'm trying to find a job for next school year and it's not going as well as I'd like, but that hasn't got me crying yet. No, I feel like crying because 4 months ago I lost a friend, and I'm not quite strong enough to weather the emotional storm that has followed. My chest aches and I feel empty much of the time. Despite trying my best to rise above these feelings, I'm still tarred down with them, and it's got me dwelling on the pain of losing friends, the many ways we can lose them, and what it means. I feel like losing friends is something we just don't talk about. Oh, sure, we've all ruminated on romantic breakups, written beautiful songs and poetry to express our grief, but friendships faltering is another domain entirely. It seems romance inherently invites speculation. After all, it's an exclusive relationship where an emotional flame must be perpetually lit. That risk often precedes the pain of the breakup. Friendships lack such exclusivity. We don't expect our friends to one day leave us, but all of them will, won't they? So, what's going on when we lose a friend? The most common way we lose friends has little to do with conflict or strife, but inaction. Most friendships are ones of convenience. We work or live or study together, so we have a relationship. But when the context of that friendship disappears, so too does the connection. We drift away, unable to sustain whatever we had. Maybe we graduate high school, move to a new city, change our job, or have kids, and bam, we're not where or who we once were, so we're no longer with the same people. It's totally natural, but that doesn't mean it lacks pain. Oh sure, I can remember many friends to whom distance leaves me unaffected. I sat in the same class of 20-ish children from kindergarten through 8th grade, 9 years of my life, and most of those people I'm fine never seeing again. In high school, I had this friend I hung out with every day after school and haven't seen since we graduated. I sometimes miss hanging out, but it doesn't cause me any pain. My life is littered with these relationships, and yours is too. I'd wager by this point in my early 30s, I've drifted away from more friends than I've ever had at any one time. An entire graveyard of friendships that once meant something to me. Like all graveyards, though, while most headstones mean nothing to us, some mean everything. Matthew is a grave I visit often. When I was 7 or 8, his family moved next door to my grandma. As small towns often go, Matthew wasn't even that far outside my social circle. He was my cousin's cousin. Matthew and I had more in common than a few cousins, though. We read the same kinds of books, played the same kinds of games, and watched the same kinds of TV shows and movies. More importantly, We both had obsessive personalities and a love of listening to someone else's obsession, so we never ran out of things to talk about. Since I spent every other weekend and most of each summer at my grandma's, and she lived in the middle of the country with literally only one neighbor, Matthew's family, I spent untold hours with him. We were so inseparable, it became a running joke in both our families. If I was coming up for the weekend, I was going to spend most of it with him. We talked on the phone multiple times a week, often until one of our wireless receivers would run out of batteries. We'd even do it when I was right next door. My grandma disliked that I hogged her phone to talk to someone who was literally a quarter mile away. He was more into games than I was, and I loved watching him play. He's how I experienced many of the classics: Kingdom Hearts, Final Fantasy VII, Sonic Adventure 2, all games I played secondhand on his bed. I loved his mom and treated her like my own. We had endless conversations walking barefoot around the countryside, and until very recently when my wife finally caught up to him, he was my longest tenured friend, best friend I saw on a regular basis. Still, we lived 3 hours apart by car in the 10 years leading up to either of us getting a driver's license. So when I reached high school and my dad stopped picking us up or taking us to grandma's every other weekend, and then grandma moved away, Matthew and I started to drift apart. I didn't give up. I spent a significant chunk of every summer with my grandma, and even when she lived 2 towns over from him, still found ways to hang out with Matthew, spending weeks at either his place or my grandma's, watching, E3, playing Gears of War, surfing the web, going swimming, or getting into teenage trouble. We loved each other, and that spark that had always carried us remained. Then I went to college, and he got a job in our hometown. I spent every summer abroad or getting married. Well, that one only happened once, but I missed out on any final long staycations together. Not that he would have had the availability with his work life. The last time I saw him was on March 24th, 2012. At a family get-together, I asked our mutual cousin if I could see him. I wanted my then-girlfriend, now wife, a chance to meet him. My cousin got in contact with Matthew's sister, Elizabeth, who he said was working his shift at Walmart. So I went to Walmart and we talked for a few minutes. Then I left to go see The Hunger Games in theater, which is why I know the exact date, by the way, because I used to keep a spreadsheet of every movie I watched with my wife, and that's the date for when we saw Hunger Games. I should have known that would be the last time I saw my first best friend. But how can you ever know that in advance? It has been over 10 years since I last saw Matthew. Sure, neither of us use the normal social media platforms that might have kept us talking, so I don't have an immediate way to get a hold of him. But if he wanted, we could have talked during this time. We share multiple family members. It wouldn't be hard to get in contact. But now, so much time has passed, I wouldn't know what to say. I want to tell him that he meant so much to me during the loneliest, hardest years of my life. I want to tell him I'm trans, and that so much of my childhood, maybe some of the things that confused or hurt him, make sense to me now. I want to know him. I want to know if he still likes Kingdom Hearts and Sonic. Probably not. I kind of hope not. I want to know how his sister, brother, and mom are doing. But they're past the horizon of my experience, and I'm too shallow or too scared to cross over. Maybe I'm afraid that how I feel about him, even all these years later, is completely foreign to how he's ever felt about me. Or maybe he's just as afraid to cross the gap as I am and will forever exist apart as the canyon between us continues to drift in opposite directions. It's easy to see why you drifted apart from someone, but it's not always so easy to live with it. If we're lucky, we don't notice the separation because we make new friends, continue living our life without much difference. But those special friends we once had but no longer do stick with us. Their absence is felt because no one could ever replace them. I've only ever had one Matthew in my life. He may have only been at a particular location at a particular time, but it's because, not in spite of those facts, that I've never had a friend like him. I have to live with that, with the decisions we both made that brought us here, so far from one another. You, too, can look back and see the many people you've drifted away from, the ones of little consequence and the ones you can't bear to dwell on too long. I wonder what that desire to look away and avoid thinking about it says about us. Perhaps this pain, both necessary and ordinary, is a kind of shame. Shame that we couldn't find a way to prioritize what was once so important. So now it's important to us no more. The strangest and most common way to lose friends is through death. Of course, death is not an easy topic to broach. Us human beings have never not dealt with people around us dying. Our conversation today, though, is not about capital D death, but how death ends friendships. When I say death is common, I simply mean that as we grow older, our friends will die and we'll be left to pick up the pieces. You can theoretically avoid the other pains of losing friends, like drifting away or them leaving you, but you can't avoid the inevitability of them dying or you dying. Eventually, one of you will leave the other behind. Yet, death's strange because unlike any other way of losing friends, death is both final and sudden. It does not care about the story of your friendship. It does not allow for a resolution to your relationship. It does not allow for the potential for more entries to be written. Whatever your relationship was at the moment of death, that's where it will stay, forever prematurely terminated. I feel unqualified to write on this topic. I've had few friends and family die on me. I'm 32 and 4 of my 6 grandparents are still alive. Thanks God. My parents and siblings remain on this earth. Pretty much all the friends I've made are kicking it around somewhere, even if I've drifted away from them. Still, the 2 most painful people I've lost to this specter are my grandma and Vanessa. Vanessa was a close friend I met in college through Christian ministry. After my freshman year, she and I, along with 20 or so other college students, went on a mission trip overseas. On that mission trip, I met my now wife. Say what you will about the ethics of what I was doing on the other side of the planet, and you know I've got my own complicated feelings on the topic, but it was a context where I felt a great amount of purpose in my actions, and I was surrounded by people similarly driven by such purpose. I met many friends on that trip, particularly Vanessa, who I grew close with. We had various adventures around the megalopolis city in which we lived. We ate lunch every day together. I shared with her all this indie music I liked that she had never heard of. She was particularly fond of Owen Pallett's Heartland, an album I've never stopped associating with her since. We played euchre into the night, laughed all the time, and chatted about anything and everything. Vanessa was such a ball of joy. She had an infectious, positive energy toward helping other people and being in relationship with them. She was like your extroverted extrovert. She seemed to always have more in the tank when it came to talking, an energy I've always sought to cultivate and emulate. Even today, I wish I was more like Vanessa because she made the people around her feel a way that I wish I could. When we returned to our small college town, Vanessa and I continued our friendship and hung out fairly often. Yet, she was a few years older than me and as a result graduated when I was a sophomore. She then went back long-term to that overseas country we shared, where I'd also return a few years later, but her trek across the globe wasn't as kind. She grew depressed and had some serious mental health crises, issues I could barely help with on the other side of the globe. Yet, as someone who has dealt with depression and suicidal ideation, I felt like I could help her. The two of us emailed back and forth, first for the 2 years she was on the other side of the world, then for the 2 years where she lived in the States and I lived where she was just living. The entire time, her mental state got worse, and I grew to despair. Those last few years, I could only watch from afar as more drastic measures were taken to keep her safe from herself. It wasn't enough. I don't know what could have been enough. Vanessa took her own life shortly after I returned to the States. My wife, who was always closer to her than I was, collapsed in my arms upon hearing the news. We attended her celebration of life, and I guess we said goodbye. Despite the finality of it, I've never felt like our relationship ran its course. It's always felt like an incomplete sentence. I think about her often. I once asked a mutual friend how often he thinks about her, and he replied, "I don't think about it at all," which made me feel like such a freak and so alone. I don't know why, but I've got to keep that flame of hers in my heart. It's really nothing, though, isn't it? I can't do anything other than live in the aftermath of her death, keep going with this absence, this unfinished story looming underneath everything I do. I suppose the truth is that no friendship has a satisfying ending, but death feels particularly unsavory. Perhaps it teaches us not to rely on stories, to just live in the moment until that moment's gone. But regardless of what I'm supposed to take away from it, ultimately I just feel empty. Empty that I'm here today in this attic without my friend. Chances are, though, that Vanessa and I would have drifted away like I did with Matthew. Would I feel less pain today if I knew I could talk to her? I don't know, but I wish I knew that she was just a phone call away. In an ironic twist, I've never been spiritual because of some heaven that at the end of life. In fact, I've always felt like the afterlife was something not worth putting any stake in. It seems just too perfect for me. But I do sincerely hope there is a heaven, if only it means I can see her again. You may be wondering, hey, when are you going to get to that person who you recently lost? The one that's got you listening to that crying playlist? Well, they left me. Or rather, abruptly decided they did not want to be friends anymore, which is the second most painful way for a friendship to end. It's hard to imagine something worse than what my friend told me in early November. I no longer want to be friends. If I had known Cameron for a few weeks, I doubt it would have stung that bad. But Cameron and I's lives were intertwined. We met over a decade ago in college and talked nearly every day since. We played and recorded music together in a band. We played literally thousands of hours of video games together. For a long time, I considered Cameron, along with a few others, my best friend. He and two others formed the core friend group I've had throughout my entire adulthood. When I moved to China for 2 years, I missed them dearly. Then when I came back to the States for my master's degree from 2016 to 2018, I visited them as often as I could, trekking 2 hours once or twice a month to spend the weekend with them. When choosing where to get my PhD, I was desperate to get into UW-Milwaukee, not just because it's a good program, but so I could be close to my friends, to those I love and who love me. Since moving to Milwaukee 6 years ago, I saw Cameron 2 or more times a week, every single week. If I was hanging out with friends for the past half decade, I was hanging out with them. Yet, while I've tried to detail to you how much time we spent together, that's not the point. The point is how important Cameron is, to me. They were one of the few people on this planet I genuinely felt comfortable around. They were one of the first people I came out to as trans. I remember driving by my old hometown for the first time since my grandma died, with just them, crying and explaining how much she meant to me. Cameron was special to me, someone I thought I'd grow old with, someone I did grow old with. It's surprisingly difficult for me to put this all into words for you. I don't know where to start or end my discussion of Cameron. It feels like a hodgepodge of random reference points and emotions cobbled together with hot wax burning my hands. Perhaps it's all too recent, all too raw to discuss with you. Just know, if I look back on the story of my life, Cameron is probably one of the 6 most important people I've ever met. I know it's kind of a big number, but I included my parents in there, okay? Then, on a November afternoon, I awoke from a nap and looked at my phone. On it was a text message from my close friend telling me they never wanted to see me again. Looking back, I responded in a rather pathetic fashion. I tried to reason with them to continue being my friend, tried to bargain for some table scraps of friendship. I couldn't imagine my life without them, without the friend group of which we are both a part. I immediately saw the writing on the wall, that they were more central to our mutual relationships than I was. They were closer, perhaps, to our other friends than me. They had lived with them longer. And our lives were mostly structured around hanging out at their place. So I wouldn't just lose Cameron if they got their way, but most of my friends. I was right. Outside of my other best friend, I've seen everyone else in that group once since Cameron made their decision, after seeing them every week for years. But my correctness doesn't matter. What matters is Cameron's discomfort around me. I don't really know for how long or to what degree, but suffice to say, they reached a point where my presence disturbed them, or they just weren't comfortable. We did butt heads sometimes, both relatively strong personalities, but ironically, I only did so because I felt comfortable enough with them to be vulnerable enough to assert myself and how I felt. The last time we hung out before they broke up with me, Cameron and I had a disagreement about a game of Magic the Gathering, where I was a little hot-headed. I did not hurl insults at them. I didn't do anything particularly untoward. I didn't throw anything. I didn't scream or yell. But obviously the interaction left a poor taste in their mouth. I apologized for my actions later that night, and actually told my therapist a few days later that even though the conflict made me feel panicky, everything would be okay. And I was proud of myself for trusting my friends enough to express myself, because I've spent most of my life hiding how I felt from people who might abuse me for it. Cameron's departure from my life isn't the first such loss I've experienced. I've never met my biological father, who ditched my mom when I was a few months old. A few years later, my mom and adoptive father split up, and Dad slowly left the picture too. I'm lucky if we talk twice a year at this point. In high school, my mom absconded as well. She would leave home for work up to a month straight. I was left at home with no one else. The feeling of others abandoning me is a particular sore spot. I don't naturally trust others not to go. It has always been a huge problem for me. So I spent years in therapy trying to understand myself better so I could trust others the way you're supposed to. I grew so much in recent years, became closer to the person I wanted to be. In one afternoon, and for reasons that still befuddle me, Cameron obliterated that progress. Still, I don't want you to get the impression that I hate Cameron. I don't want you to hate them either. My other best friends are angry on my behalf, but the entire situation has only ever caused me grief. The pain of losing Cameron has been almost unbearable. I didn't sleep for 2 days after they reached out to tell me. I still sit around wondering if they just flat out hate me. I have way too many panic attacks, and I'm ashamed about that. I try to imagine my life without them, and I can't, even though I'm already living that life. My trust in others is completely eroded. Every time I hang out with a close friend, I wonder to myself, is this the last time I'll ever see them? Yet, I'm terrified of being perceived as clingy, and I've started avoiding friendships altogether. Yet, at least inside, I am more clingy than I've ever been. I'm filled with regret, wondering if only I did something differently, or was someone else entirely. Could I have avoided this? Yet, I don't hate Cameron. I don't view any of these sour emotions as their fault. They're my baggage. And perhaps that baggage is what made Cameron uncomfortable with me in the first place. When they reached out, Cameron seemed to be seriously wary of ever being in the same room as me again. But I asked them as politely as possible if we could meet up to go for a walk and talk about it, just to help me move on. So we went for a walk. They explained themselves a bit more. It cleared some things up and other things made me more confused. Prior to the meeting, I told them I wrote them a letter and I wanted to read it to them. They didn't want me to read it, but relented when I explained how important it was to me. I don't know what they expected, but it seemed to catch them by surprise. I knew neither sharp words or protestations would make me feel better. Instead, I wrote a letter about how loved Cameron made me feel over our friendship. I thanked them for everything they did for me. I did not mention once the pain of losing them. Instead, it was kind of a love letter, describing what they meant to me. I told them I'll cherish our friendship as long as I live, and I meant every word. Maybe you find me weak for that. Maybe you think it's courageous or good. I don't know. I thought it would give me a sense of closure and let me move on a little more easily. And for the car ride back to my place after our walk, I felt exactly that way. But ever since, the sting of losing my friend remains. It aches in all the ways I've already described. Still, I wouldn't have ended it in any other way. It's more important to me to be true to myself, to our relationship, than to be right. I hope I'll keep being true to myself until the day I die. I hope Cameron will be too, even if we'll be doing it apart. That's why I don't harbor any terrible feelings toward them, why I house all these negative emotions within my own greenhouse. I know Cameron did what they thought was best for them. If I'm the one who must be hurt for that to happen, then the best way I can love them is not forcing them to dwell on our mutual past, but freeing them to fly off into their bright future. I hope that doesn't sound too sentimental, but let's be honest, it's pretty damn sentimental, huh? You may be confused as to why I said that was the second most painful way to lose someone. What could be more painful than a friend leaving you, especially after my heart-wrenching description of losing Cameron? Well, surprisingly, you leaving them. Here's how I'd put it. When we cut ourselves off from someone, we leave a scar on our own body, not necessarily on theirs. We have to live with that decision, not only owning whatever pain of ours from the relationship we harbor, but also the pain of knowing how we hurt someone else. As a quick disclaimer, I'm not telling you to not skip town on relationships that are awful for you. I'm remarking on how sometimes the most painful thing isn't being left, it's doing the leaving. Even if we do it for our own good. In the fall of 2009, I didn't just leave one friend. I left an entire group, and not just any group, the first real group of friends in which I ever belonged. I did it for selfish, stupid reasons I still regret now, an entire lifetime later. Elliot, Madeline, Hannah, and Leo were my core friend group throughout most of high school. Elliot, Madeline, and Hannah were all friends since elementary school, while Leo and I joined a bit later. Leo through Hannah, who he dated, and me through Elliot, who I met in English class my freshman year and eventually became my best friend. We were all band geeks, sitting together on coach buses on long trips between marching band competitions, and we once traveled to Washington, D.C. to play in a parade, which was far for us. I guess if you live in Washington, D.C., that's not too big of a trip. We loved watching movies together, picking out terrible flicks at the local video rental store. Band kids could have study hall in the band room rather than elsewhere, so we could practice our instruments, but most of the time we were just goofing off and talking rather than studying. I took classes to hang out with these people, drove up to the even smaller town they resided in to play Risk and Monopoly, somehow having a good time, and not because those games are good, but because we enjoyed each other's company. We went to prom as a group, and Elliot was my date. We took pictures in a photo booth, which I still have. You don't ever have friends like the ones you have in high school, or the cats. I know high school sucks, but those people with whom it sucked together stand out as important figures in practically anyone's life, right? Maybe your friends sucked in high school, but mine didn't. Leo was a little uneven, but surprisingly loyal. He drove me everywhere before I got my license. While I wasn't as close with Madeline or Hannah, I would have still hung out with them any day of the week over anyone else on earth. Elliot, though, while not my first best friend, as we've already talked about Matthew, was more important to my development as a person than any friend I've ever had. They got me into new kinds of music. Pretty much all of my musical tastes today are descended from their influence. I grew over vulnerable and shared too much of my emotions with him, but he didn't leave me because I was a needy, emotionally stunted teenager. He always inspired me to try harder, be better, whether at music or just being a cool person. I've met very few adults who are as cool as Elliot was when they were in high school. In the crushing loneliness of my high school experience, where my family lost our house, then my parents just started leaving for up to a month at a time, it was these people who comforted me, who kept me company. I would have done anything for them, and yet I left them. Not at graduation, not because we went to different colleges, but in the middle of our senior year, in an abrupt and silent manner, practically designed to inflict as much pain as possible, even if it wasn't my intention. I still have trouble understanding my motivations at that time. I think it was a leftover soup of disjointed emotions and poor decision making. I know I had some conflict with Leo because he wasn't always easy to get along with. I know I was becoming more religious at the time, and these friends weren't into that, so I felt a disconnect I didn't know how to remedy. I know I always wanted more emotionally from Elliot than he could give me. I guess I really am just a clingy person, and I know I hated myself for it. We could try to identify more ingredients, but what matters is what I did, which was ghost them. I went to the same classes as them and didn't chat, didn't text or call them, didn't ask to hang out on the weekend or engage with them when they tried to reach out. Or if I did, it was in a curt manner meant to dissuade further contact. I stabbed them with an invisible knife and then kept twisting when they tried to figure out why. Probably because I didn't know why myself. If you want to understand how stupid it was, I didn't even have some new crop of friends waiting in the wings. I just started spending all my time in and out of school alone. I fell into a deep pit of depression, one of the worst of my life, far worse than whatever I'm going through now. I genuinely have no idea how much it must have hurt them all, particularly Elliot, who I was so close to. I have a hard time imagining their pain because I don't want to imagine myself as having ever been important to them. But I'm also the most despicable person who ever existed, so the pain must be greater than I could ever envision. I can tell you it hurt me more than any other time I've lost a friend. It's not just the whole of loneliness that came after either. I eventually made friends, the friend group Cameron was a part of, and they're also great friends. Friends I met in high school and I've had ever since. In some ways, it was good for me. And looking back, I can tell I grew from the experience in some way, if it feels twisted and disgusting sometimes. No, it's the regret of how it all went down that's been the killer in the passing years. I'm well aware it's the worst thing I've ever done, and I feel deep in my soul that what I did to them is what everyone should and will eventually do to me. I know I wasn't noble in my deed, that I wasn't striving for a better future for myself, but that I didn't know how to be close to someone without impaling them with my own emotional volatility, and they got caught loving me, someone who had never learned to form a healthy attachment, so was always destined to either fade away or leave them bleeding. I know I'm being dramatic, but I hope you understand just how much self-hate I've accumulated from doing that. If I think on it too long, I just hate myself and nothing more. I know it's not healthy or good to feel this way, but as you can hopefully tell, sometimes leaving someone hurts more than being left. Luckily, not all farewells, even those invisibly and dangerously sent, are final. Elliot, it just so happens, lives in the same city as I. In the intervening years since college, we've kept up from afar, talking once or twice a year, but at some point during the pandemic, I reached out and asked to go for a walk, then lunch again, and every month a meal together, followed by a long walk outdoors. Every time we met up, I felt something important stir inside of me. I left every meeting feeling a little bit alive. Then I invited them over for a movie and cooked them a meal. I asked to do it again every week, if possible, and now, for a year and a half, we've met once or twice a week, watched movies, had double features, cooked meals, talked over Messenger, made playlists for each other. We picked up our friendship from way back when, and now we're closer than I think we ever were. And yes, we did talk about what happened, and I apologized for what I did. Actually, I really need to be careful about not apologizing too much. I'm still filled with regret over what I did, but I'm also filled with joy to be best friends with Elliot again, despite an unreasonable gap in our time together on this planet. Most of the friends you lose don't end up back in your life, but some do. And that reconnection, that rekindling is one of the most beautiful things human beings are capable of. I'm so grateful I'm capable of it. And I want you to know that you're capable of it too. Strangely, through this wonderful second friendship with an old friend, I am more sure than ever that something exists beyond me, that someday, somehow, even if it's just in the silence of non-existence, I'll be with Vanessa, my grandma, and everyone I'll ever lose again. The many ways we can lose them and what it means. What do motorcycles mean? What do motorcycles mean indeed?
It's raining!
We loved each other, and that spark which started the siren that is playing in the distance has always remained and will never leave us. We just gotta wait. We just gotta wait. We just gotta wait for things to change. Change. All right. You leaving them. I hate vehicles and I want them all to be taken off the road. I've been listening to trucks crossing the street a lot today. The motorcycles are here. They make me fear that I'll never complete recording this video.